Good morning and welcome back. If you missed the introduction, I'm Brian Aldridge. And if our panelists can show their video, I believe we have everyone. So as Hannah mentioned in her introduction, the first session that we'll have today is on the advancement and promotion process at UCSF. What I'm going to do is go over some slides and some fundamental information at the beginning of our session. Actually, this is a good point to let you know that all of my slides and the presenter slides will be available on the Academic Affairs website at the end of today's program. So don't worry if we go over a slide quickly or if you didn't have a chance to jot a note down. So, but I wanted to introduce our panelists because after I go through some fundamental information with the slides, we're going to have an opportunity for a Q&A with the folks that you see here on the screen with me. And so I'll introduce them, what their role is, and then they'll exit. But I thought it would be useful for you to know who you'll have an opportunity to ask questions of when the time comes. And you will see that your school is represented by those of us on the screen. So I'll start with by introducing Dr. Renee Binder, who is the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in the School of Medicine. Thank you, Renee. I'll then introduce Dr. Sunita Mutha, who is the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in the School of Dentistry. I'll then introduce Dr. Jeff Critchfield, who's a professor of medicine and the past chair of the Committee on Academic Personnel, or you may have heard it referred to as CAP. Then introduce Dr. Catherine Waters. Hi, Catherine, who is the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in the School of Nursing. And last but not least, I'll introduce Dr. Tom Kearney, who is the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in the School of Pharmacy. So thank you all very much for joining at the beginning. If you can kind of turn off your video, and then we'll have you join as soon as I finish the slides. And with that, I am going to attempt to share my screen. Okay. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the faculty review process at UCSF, and hopefully provide some clarity to a process that can be somewhat confusing, lengthy, and sometimes appear kind of like a black box. But that's what we're here for, is to help it make more sense for you today. Okay. Figure out how to advance slides. Looks like I have to do it this way. Okay. So I'll start with some potentially what I believe to be some useful resources. There are 3 panels on the slide representing 3 different resources. The panel on the left is my office's website. It's the Academic Affairs website. I think you might find it useful for some specific UCSF policies, for some Office of the President and system-wide policies. I have to say it's probably not the very first go-to if you have a policy-related question. In that regard, I, as a junior faculty member, and still find the middle panel, the Faculty Handbook for Success, a really useful resource. It's created by the Academic Senate, and it's updated annually. You can see it was revised last in September of last year. It's a really nice distillation of campus and university policy in very readable language. And for most straightforward questions that faculty might have about advancement or appointment or the different faculty series or what's expected, you can find really helpful and very accurate answers in the Faculty Handbook for Success. For some of the more detailed, nuanced, or complicated or very special circumstances, we'll talk about some other people who can be helpful resources. And then finally, on the right side of the slide is what's referred to as PMAP, or the Personalized Mentoring Advancement and Promotion module that was created by past members of CAP. You access this by actually logging in through My Access, and when you do that, the system knows your series, rank, and step, and will give you information and specific policy references that are relevant to any upcoming academic action that you might have. So it's a really helpful resource. Okay, who are the people that are important to your advancement process? At the top of the slide is your HR shared services representative or analyst. These are the people usually who are the first ones to contact you about an upcoming merit or promotion. They'll ask you to revise your CV, for example, and they will work with your department administrator, and your department chair to assemble all the materials that are needed for your advancement packet. They're actually quite also knowledgeable about the policies that I'll be referring to and the policies that govern academic advancement. So a really helpful resource. Next, going down the slide, are your mentor and your chair. These, of course, are folks who are closer to the ground in terms of the work that you're actually doing as a faculty member. They can provide customized advice on promotion strategy, for example, and of course give you probably a better sense of what your peers might be expecting in terms of academic advancement. Next, going down the slide are some of the people that I just introduced. These are the Vice and Associate Deans of Academic Affairs. These folks will review your packet, just like the department does, and just like CAP and I do. But they're an incredibly useful resource. I think in some cases, I feel perhaps underutilized, but a really wonderful resource for complicated issues, or just to kind of get kind of a litmus test or a kind of a first pass at some issue that you're really wondering about, or that's very important to you, but that you might be getting conflicting information from others about. I would encourage you to make use of your Vice and Associate Deans for Academic Affairs. And you can see the names of the folks listed here. And then at the campus level, there's myself. And then there's the Assistant Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, who is Emerald Light, who you will hear from excuse me, after our advancement and promotion session. She'll be talking about compensation. Okay, details all faculty should know. You should know your series, rank, and step. We'll talk about those things in just a moment. You probably do know what your salary is. You may not know what your covered compensation is. Covered compensation is that portion of your total compensation that counts towards your retirement benefits. And Emerald Light in the next session will talk a little bit about that. Also listed on that second bullet is your compensation plan, or comp plan as it's often referred to. This is something you should have easy access to at all times. You can get it from your department manager. That's probably the quickest way to get it. And it's a document that's fairly lengthy, but it has some important information in it around three major areas. One is how your compensation is determined. The other is it gives information on important leave benefits like childbearing leave, child rearing leave, and extended illness leave. And another important point in the compensation plan is that it provides information to help guide you through outside professional activities that you might be considering. So service on an editorial board for a journal, for example, giving outside talks, starting a company. If you're thinking about doing outside clinical work, definitely consult your compensation plan. So, and I would really encourage you to access your compensation plan and look at it before you engage in any outside professional activity, so you make sure to do it in the right way. And then other details that you should know, you should have some sense, of course, of the percent time that you're spending in various areas of your faculty work and what type of support that your department is providing you. Many of the items on the last two bullets are things, hopefully, that you discussed with your department chair when you both reviewed and signed a piece of paper that was titled "Important Documents for Discussion" with department chairs. It's a catalyst for discussion that's required in all appointment packets. So you probably did see that at some point in time. And if you could dig it out or get a copy back from your department if you're not sure. Okay, so faculty appointments at UCSF. UCSF and the UC system are different from many other universities in that we have 5 faculty series. So not just a tenure and non-tenure track, or not just a research and a clinical track, for example, at other academic health institutions. But we have a more complicated system, which I think lends great strength to our system, but also, of course, makes it more complicated. We'll talk about what those 5 tracks are in just a moment. In terms of ranks, we're fairly traditional. We have assistant, associate, and full professor, like most universities. And the UC system is unique in that we have this step system. So there are different steps at each one of the ranks, and you can see them listed here. Most people spend 6 to 8 years at the assistant professor rank and there are 2 years between steps at that rank. So, and the steps that are usually used are either 1 through 4, as you can see here, or sometimes 2 through 4 if you're appointed at assistant step 2. At the associate rank, there's also 2 years for each step, and most faculty spend 6 years there and use steps 1, 2, and 3. And then there's the full professor rank. And there are up to 9 steps, and even beyond the 9th step, there's something called above scale. So a advancement that entails a change in rank is termed a promotion. An advancement that entails an increase in step is usually referred to in UC terminology as a merit advancement. So you may have heard those terms. Okay, so these are the 5 series in the UC faculty series in the UC system. By system-wide policy, they're divided into those faculty series that automatically confer membership in what's called the Academic Senate and those that do not. By being a member of the Academic Senate from a UC system-wide perspective, that means that those faculty have a role in the shared governance in the university. The distinction between Academic Senate and non-Senate faculty at other campuses can be significant. And at UCSF, the distinction between them is much, much less significant. And I'll show you that on an upcoming slide. So the 5 series, or the professor series, sometimes called ladder rank or tenure track series, professor in residence, professor of clinical X, I'm a clinical X professor, the adjunct professor series, and the health sciences clinical professor series. On our campus, actually 56% of our faculty are non-Senate faculty, or are in the adjunct or health sciences clinical professor series. And the vast majority of those, as you might guess, are in the health science clinical professor series. Okay, so I was referring to this a moment ago. So this compares some of the rights and privileges of Senate faculty to non-Senate faculty at UCSF. And there are a couple places where they differ, but I think importantly, there are some significant areas where they do not differ. One, as I mentioned, is the participation in shared governance. There are campus level votes. All of our faculty vote regardless of Senate series or not. Service and serving as a chair on a UCSF campus academic Senate committee is open to both Senate and non-Senate faculty. There's one exception in that non-Senate faculty do not serve on what's called the Privilege and Tenure Committee, which hears grievances and discipline cases. In terms of voting on academic actions, Senate and non-Senate faculty vote on each other's actions if they're at the rank of the individual being reviewed or above. And then areas where they do differ, the UC Mortgage Origination Program, the home loan program, is a UC system-wide sponsored program that unfortunately is only eligible to Senate series faculty at the present time. Filing a grievance with privilege and tenure, there are separate processes for Senate and non-Senate faculty by system-wide rules, but all faculty at least have a path towards filing a grievance and getting that grievance considered. And then on our campus, all faculty, Senate and non-Senate, are eligible for professional development leave. That would be sabbatical or something kind of similar to that. Okay, so what's expected in order to advance in your series? This compares the series, and you can see the 4 areas of academic review are teaching and mentoring. I'm using my cursor. I don't know if you can see it, but I'll point to it. Research and creative work, or sometimes referred to as scholarly creative activity, professional competence, and service, university and public service. So you can see the ladder rank and in-residence series are pretty much identical in that excellence is expected across all 4 areas of review. In the clinical X series, there's more flexibility in terms of what's considered scholarly or creative work. The one key piece of information to be aware of, though, is that the scholarly work must be disseminated outside the university in the Clinical X series. The hallmark of the adjunct series is that there's a significant imbalance. So in the area of focus, in this example, it's research and creative activity, but it could be one of the other areas. There has to be excellent performance at or nearly on par with the highest expectation in the other series. And there needs to be something in the areas that the individual doesn't focus on, but usually much less activity. And then in the health science clinical series, you see that the emphasis is on teaching, mentoring, and professional competence. And there is a requirement for scholarly and creative activity, but there's even more flexibility than there is in the Clinical X series, and we'll show you some examples of that in a moment. Okay, in terms of rules and privileges, I'm going to go over this kind of quickly. Only the ladder rank series confers tenure. Most faculty are on year-to-year appointments. One exception is associate and full professor faculty in the in-residence series. They can have longer appointments, but otherwise, myself and all of us that are in, all of you and us who are in the health sciences clinical series and adjunct series are on year-to-year appointments. We covered Senate membership. Only the ladder rank faculty, which is only 10% of our total faculty, are eligible for a state-funded sabbatical. But as I mentioned earlier, all faculty in all series are eligible for professional development leave, as long as you can kind of negotiate it successfully with your department and get support for whatever leave you're requesting. Appraisal. Appraisal is a full academic review that occurs at the beginning of your 4th year of service for the university at the assistant rank. And it's basically an evaluation to give you a sense of how ready you are for promotion to the associate professor rank. It's a very useful tool to get kind of a general gauge on where you are and how ready you are within the next couple of years to go up for that advancement to associate professor. 8-year rule refers to an 8-year limitation on service at the assistant professor rank that applies at UCSF only to the ladder rank in residence and Clinical X series. So at the end of that 8-year period, us must either advance to the next rank, to associate rank, or in most instances change to a series that doesn't have that 8-year rule, one of the non-Senate series, as you can see listed here. And then the expectation for percent effort is that your full professional commitment will be to the university if you're in an academic Senate series. There are exceptions for family reasons that need to be discussed and approved at the department level. So it's important that you recognize there are some options for exceptions, but generally the expectation is 100% time. But that expectation doesn't hold for the adjunct and health sciences clinical professor series. Okay, so we covered the criteria for advancement. We said that the criteria differ by series. Ask your department if they have a more specific document on advancement criteria for your series. Some departments do, many departments do not. But if you do, of course, you want to have access to it. And if there's any one document in addition, I would say, to the faculty handbook that you might want to access to get perhaps in a more sense of what it takes to go from one rank to the other, check out this link at the bottom of the slide. It's called APM for Academic Personnel Manual 210. Generally, I don't recommend going to the APM because it's really difficult to read, but this particular section, is actually quite useful. Okay, a lot of people have had questions around what academic review is going to look like during this COVID-19 period. A really important issue, and we can cover some of it in the Q&A, but you may have seen announcements that came from me, Dan Lowenstein, and the chair of CAP on an automatic stop the clock for assistant professors in a Senate series. So by default, the clock has been extended by an additional year, so to 9 years, and faculty do not need to request it. You're not required to use it, that additional 9th year. If you're ready for promotion before the 9th year, you can let your department know or have a discussion with your department about your readiness for promotion and go forward before that 9th year. And up to 3 stop the clocks can be granted. Other reasons for stopping the clock you might know are childbearing, child rearing, personal illness, care for a dependent, bereavement, there are a variety of other things. And for non-Senate faculty, they're not subject, as I mentioned, to the 8-year rule, but non-Senate faculty can request a deferment and not go up until the 9th year or beyond if you have additional stop the clocks. Well, actually, there's no stop the clocks in that series, so you can request deferment. In terms of documenting the impact of COVID-19 on your career, I would encourage you to use one or both of the resources that are described here. The second bullet is encouragement for faculty to document on their CV any positive contributions to COVID. I have some examples at the bottom of the slide. And I really encourage you to use this functionality in Advance, that's the online faculty information system I'll mention in just a moment, to upload a candidate personal statement if there are particular challenges or positive contributions that you want to make evident to everybody who looks at your file. So if you upload a candidate personal statement, everyone who has access to your file in the review process will, I guarantee, look at it, because it's a very important part of the academic review process. And so you can see some of the examples that I listed here that are both positive contributions to COVID and some of the challenges that you might be facing relative to caregiving or reduced productivity due to shelter in place or reduced occupancy of your office or research space. The important thing is just to get that information into your review file so that reviewers who have a longstanding practice of taking overall context of faculty work into account in academic review, so that they have that information at the time they're reviewing your packet. Because if it's not in the file, of course, they won't know it. And to upload a personal statement, you can access this slide later, and it'll tell you, which kind of boxes to check. But when you're in Advance, you go to My Packet, you go to Attachments, and then you just hit Browse, and you can upload a statement, and you can title it whatever you want. Brian Aldridge, COVID Impact, for example, to make it easy for reviewers to know what it is the statement's about. Okay, the Health Sciences Clinical Professor Series had some policy changes in 2018 that you may have heard about or hear about. The main policy change was that there's an expectation for scholarly or creative activity, but the important kind of context that's provided in this quote from the Academic Personnel Manual is these are activities that really derive from and support your primary responsibilities in clinical teaching, professional, and service activities. So there's not an expectation to go out, get grants, but really there's a broad definition of what's considered scholarly and creative, and I'll show that on the next slide. You may have heard that there's, in the past, there's a requirement for regional or national reputation. That requirement no longer exists. So if you hear that, you can disregard it. And these are some of the examples of things that are considered scholarly or creative in the Health Sciences Clinical Series. So many of you on our program today are in that series. This is the APM section that I referred you to before, APM 210. It has some really concrete and very helpful examples for the HS Clinical Series and for the other series on what the expectations are for advancement. And you can see things like contributions to clinical guidelines, quality improvement programs, participation and contributions to community programs, all considered scholarly or creative in that particular series. Okay, a few words about accelerated advancement. Accelerated advancement means going forward in rank or in step more quickly than the usual time period, and I mentioned the usual time periods earlier. And essentially, exceptional performance in at least one of the 4 areas of academic review is required. And that can be getting a grant that's well beyond the expectations for your series, receiving a competitive professional award for contributions to diversity or to your discipline, for example. Some schools reward extraordinary service to important campus committees, like the Animal Care and Use Committee or the IRB, and some schools the service on the Admissions Committee with accelerated advancement. So I would encourage you to talk to your chair and or associate dean or vice dean for academic affairs about that. Okay, so this diagram shows the path of your academic review packet that starts with you in the upper left, gets assembled by your department where they add reference letters, teaching evaluations. There'll be a faculty vote within your department. It then goes to your academic affairs vice or associate dean, as I mentioned. From there, it goes to the lower left of the slide to Committee on Academic Personnel, and then to me for a final decision. So an important point to keep in mind, at any step in this process, in this review process, your file can be sent back for additional information. So if one reviewer has a request for clarification. The other thing important to know is that any denial of an action will always first take place as something called a tentative denial, which basically means it's been reviewed, it's not looking good, here's why, and you're provided an opportunity to actually respond and to provide additional information to support a more favorable review. So that's an important point to recognize. So the advanced system is our online faculty information system that you can use to create your CV. You can create custom CVs for other purposes and NIH bio sketches as well. When you log into Advanced, this is what it would look like if you're me. It has your name, it has my UC ID number, it has my faculty series and titles, excuse me. It'll tell me when my next eligible action is on the right-hand part of the slide. I happen at the time I took the screenshot to have a packet in process. So what I did for the next slide is I clicked here on what, I don't know if you can see my cursor, where it says my packet. And it actually showed me at the time I took this screenshot where my packet was in the review process. I had provided my CV. It then went to shared services, went to my department for review, sent to my chair, and then it went on to the associate dean for academic affairs, who was Tom Kearney in this example, and he reviewed it promptly, and that's where it ended. So you can get a sense of where your packet is in the review process, and get a sense of perhaps how much longer it might take. So your promotion packet, I think we've covered this. It includes your CV, teaching evaluations, letters of reference, the faculty vote, and your departmental recommendation letter. I think this is mostly common sense. Keep up your CV. That's the main, I think the main advice. Another one is that the importance of the fourth bullet, the importance of your accomplishments should be clear to those outside your discipline, because a lot of people, a lot of people outside your discipline will be reviewing your CV, and it's important for them to understand the significance, for example, of a particular award that you and your colleagues in your subspecialty may know well, but those of us not in your area might not know well. So that's helpful. And then the fifth bullet, also very important. Use the open field text sections wisely. You don't need to restate what's in your CV, but if you can provide some context or describe the impact of your work in those text statements, that's actually really helpful for our reviews. Letters of evaluation generally come from those who are at the rank that you're going to or above. I would recommend discussing with your mentors and your department chair and be strategic in terms of your choices for who to write letters of recommendation. I think that's the main thing that I wanted to let you know on this slide. So when does the Committee on Academic Personnel involve? They get involved at all of the major events in academic review that include appointments above the assistant rank, all go to CAP. The appraisals, that's that fourth year readiness for associate advancement review I referred to. All promotions, all changes in series. So if you want to go from HS Clin to Clinical X, for example, that would go to CAP. Accelerations, under some circumstances, they go to CAP. And the merit advancements to these special steps, that are Professor Step 6 and above scale, which for most of us is a ways off. So to summarize, and I want to allow as much time as possible for questions, know your series, know what's required for advancement, take a look at that APM section and the faculty handbook, seek out mentors and use them, and collaborators as well. be outstanding in every area of the review. That's an easy one. And seek expert advice in special circumstances. So if there's something kind of unique to what has happened with you or with your career, seek advice from the folks on that people important to your advancement slide. That was like the third or fourth slide in, because those folks can be very helpful. Use the candidate personal statement and your CV and any input you'd like to provide to your chair, so that any special or unique circumstances are really made clear for reviewers, so they can consider that in their academic review. Okay, that's my last slide, at least for the prepared talk, and I'll ask our panelists to please come on the screen if you don't mind. Let's see if I have to stop share. Great. Okay, so in advance of today's session, a number of you with your registration materials identified some questions that you'd like to have our panelists address. And I'll start with a couple of those questions while I also start to monitor the chat function to see if there's anything in there. And Hannah will be feeding questions to me as well. So hopefully we'll get in as many questions as possible. So one question that was asked was, and Catherine Waters, I'll direct this one to you if you don't mind beginning the response, and then let everyone else, anyone else who'd like to chime in can do so. Is there a freeze on faculty merits and promotions this year? So this is a question I've received several times. Catherine, do you mind saying a couple words about that?
No, so as Brian mentioned in his presentation earlier, there is not a freeze on advancement this year.
Okay, that's actually correct. There's a fair number of misperceptions that I've heard that there really is no advancement program this year. You know, I'm not going to be promoted, I can't be advanced. That's actually not the case.
I'd like to make a follow-up comment on that.
Please.
Keep in mind that process that Dr. Aldridge lined out, usually before your merit or promotion becomes effective, the review occurs about a year before. So in fact, those accomplishments that have been reviewed and under consideration for the upcoming merits and promotions effective for next July have actually already been sort of pre-COVID era. So I think where the difficulty may end up lying is if in fact COVID has impaired your ability in terms of effects on your teaching, your research for subsequent merits and promotions in subsequent years.
Okay, great. Another question that was submitted, and a version of this question is submitted every year, and for good reason. What are the, and Jeff, if you don't mind, I'll address this one to you as the past chair of CAP, because you dealt with this very frequently, I'm sure. What are the pros and cons of changing between faculty series? So for example, a number of HS clinical faculty wanted to know what's the pros and cons of me going to clinical X? Or for faculty who are in the adjunct series, what are the pros and cons for me considering going to the in-residence series?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And just first of all, thank you all. It's got 160 people here signed up. So I just admire your proactivity and your investment in your own self-development. I've done a lot of mentoring with junior faculty, and they get nervous about advancement. And so there's a sense of aversion. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to talk about it. So for you guys to we want to talk about it now, congratulations. So with regard to the series, I guess I can say Talmadge was mentoring me when he was here at the General, and he said the most important thing is know the series and know which one is most consistent with your identity. Like, how do you think of yourself? Do you think of yourself as a researcher, and perhaps then in residence might make sense? Do you think of yourself as a clinician scholar, then ClinX, and if you're an HS clinical, if that's really your identity, then that's fine. Dr. Aldridge really laid out, I think, pretty nicely. There are distinctions among the series unique to UCSF. They're actually fairly nuanced. And so this is more your own identity about what's important to you, is what I would say. And the beauty of this is your identity almost certainly will change as your career grows and evolves. And so that's the beauty of being able to change. Maybe you're an HS clinical, you do a collaboration and you find, wow, I really like to write. I really liked disseminating. Okay, if I'm gonna start disseminating more, maybe it's more appropriate for me to be in the ClinX class series. So I'm gonna change series, you know, that's wonderful. That's what we want. We want people to grow and differentiate and to create constructs to support your growth. I'll stop there, Brian, and see if anyone else has things to add.
Anyone else? If you do, just raise your hand, perhaps. Yeah, Renee, Dr. Bender.
Yeah, I'd say it's not just identity. I mean, you were sort of alluding, it's what you're doing every single day. You know, there are people who come to the School of Medicine dean's office, and they're in residence series, but they're not getting grants. And so they're saying, maybe I should stay in the in residence series and not go up for promotion because I want to stay in the in residence series. And the advice is, if you're not getting grants and you're not writing articles and you find that you're doing more clinical work and developing curricula and you're running a fellowship or things like that, change your series and get promoted because it's more important, in my opinion, in our opinion, to get promoted than it is to stay in a certain series. And if you think you're having a year where maybe you're not getting grants, but you still want to do that on an ongoing basis, then certainly stay in the in-residence. But otherwise, switch series and continue to advance through the system. At least that's our advice.
Yeah, Brian, I'd agree with what Renee said. Actually, in my own personal experience, I went from HS Clinical to ClinX, and I was kind of pressured by my department chair because he wanted more membership on the academic senate at the time. And part of the negotiation, by the way, was I was able then to negotiate for a professional development leave, in which I was able to do a mid-career fellowship to learn more about health services research, to build my own skill set, to help contribute to the curriculum as well as my advancement, as well as it incentivized me to better disseminate my research and activities. However, having what was just said, it's more rigorous. So if in fact, when you come up for promotions or from what we call the barrier step, step 6, you know, there's going to be higher expectations and you do need to disseminate as opposed to an HS clinical.
So Dr. Mutha, if you don't mind, I'll direct the next question that was submitted to you. And it's a faculty member who is expressing concern about their advancement if in a situation where they weren't quite sure if their chair or their peers were supportive of their promotion. I think this individual expressed some concern that perhaps the review might not be positive, and they were wondering, you know, should I go forward? Should I not go forward? Or what considerations might you offer to someone who's in a situation where it's time to go up, but they're just not sure how much support they're getting at the department or chair level?
Yeah, thank you, Brian, for that. You know, it's a tough situation, actually. I think it can feel quite stressful for people. What I would reinforce is on one of your slides, you had what the process was laid out. So yes, while we would all like to have full support, I do believe that most of the processes are set up in a way where we can be very objective in looking at the criteria and supporting them. So if you're feeling that you don't have immediate support, I think this is a good time to look at the other resources on that slide that Brian had and go to the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs and others to look and identify a perhaps more objective review of your bracket and say, what else should I be doing? Could I be doing? How else might I mitigate concerns? I would say I think you need to address it at all those levels, but I'll stop there and let others add on.
Okay, if okay, actually, I'll just move on to another question. Since there are a number of questions that have come in and that Hannah has forwarded to me. This one is from a faculty member in the School of Medicine, and it's regarding advancement and promotion. There's construction going on outside my window, so I apologize if you can hear it. I'll mute as soon as I say it. The message we have gotten in the School of Medicine is that committees will not change expectations for promotion or advancement based on quote unquote context, such as family leave. This seems to be in contrast to the message today. Could you provide some clarification on that? Do you mind if I address that to you, Renee?
No. We always take context into consideration when we deal with advancement. And we hear about the context either in, as Brian said, you can write a personal letter, attach it to your packet. You can have some of your reviewers address the context. So the kinds of context things that we see is that the person has had an illness or a family member has had an illness and it has interfered with productivity. Or there was a situation where the PI had a severe illness, and so that lab just wasn't very productive, and that did not interfere with advancement and promotion. So we always take context into consideration.
Brian, can I just follow up for a moment on that?
Yeah, please.
To expand just operationally, having chaired the CAP a couple of years back, I absolutely agree with Renee, and I would encourage you, one of the main take-homes I would give to you is use your narrative, the open area in the narrative, and the personal statement to give us context. The question was specifically around family leave, which is absolutely appropriate, but help us understand. The advanced CV is to tell your story, and then the bullet points and things do that. But your narrative about impact, or this was happening, or, oh, I took on this initiative that the chair asked me to do, and in fact, it grew into this much larger initiative. So it may get lost on your CV unless you tell us, and we really want to advocate for you. I think the CAP members really want to tell the most accurate story. And if you don't tell the story, we'll have to make the story as best we can tell. So help us tell your story.
Great. I want to make sure and fit in at least one more question, if not two. This question is regarding flexibility and percent effort in an academic Senate series. Is there any thought to creating more explicit flexibility in the Senate series appointments, for example, for the need to reduce effort for family or personal reasons? It seems like there's a gender discrepancy in ladder rank versus adjunct, or there's gender differences by series, fewer women in Senate series versus non-Senate series. Renee, I see you nodding your head. Do you mind taking the opening response to this?
Well, in the non-Senate series, you don't have to work full time. I mean, and that can be a permanent situation. But in the Senate series, you can reduce your effort on a temporary basis. And there are policies related to this. You can reduce it because of family needs, childbearing, child rearing, because of health, because of disability, because of care for a family member. You can't go below 51% and still stay in the compensation plan. So that's another issue because, of course, it affects your salary, whether it's covered comp or whether it's a base salary. But for short periods of time, you can reduce your effort.
It's 9:59. Does anybody else want to chime in, or I can ask perhaps one more quick question? I don't want to impinge on the next speaker. How many times can you apply for a change in series? Here's a quick one. Catherine Waters, Dr. Waters, do you mind if I direct that one to you? How many times?
Sorry, I had to, I forgot to unmute.
Okay, it's okay.
Yes. I may need some help with this in the School of Nursing. It depends on your situation in terms of when and how you want to change series. Typically, I would say that most people on average have just changed series one time.
Mm-hmm. Would anybody like to speak to any maximum number of times you can request a change in series?
Brian, I don't think is there a policy that dictates? I don't think so. But it's interesting though, this issue's come up on occasion, and I think some of the issues were brought up before. But for instance, we had a faculty member who was in HS Clinical who was doing a lot of research and thought they were a better fit for clinical X, but they weren't searched for that position. And so they would have had to subject themselves to a search for their position. And so that prevented them being able to make that change in series. Or in some cases, people have changed from a academic Senate series to a non-academic Senate series because by virtue that they wanted to be imbalanced in terms of what their emphasis was and go part-time. So there's varied reasons why you go back and forth. Or maybe even I've seen people come up to major actions who wanted to go from something that was more rigorous as a, for instance, clinical X, and then convert to HS clinical where they had an easier time in getting promoted, as was alluded to by Renee. So there's a variety of issues, but you do need to have a justification for making that change in series. And in some cases, it may have to trickle all the way up to cap, I guess, probably in most cases. So it's going to get some rigorous review in terms of what the rationale is.
Right. Okay, excellent point. We're, I think, a minute over the hour. Please join me.
Don't we have till 10:15, Brian?
Let me check the calendar. Do we
Yeah,
have
that's what Hannah said on the chat.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's great. Oh, fantastic. Okay. My apologies. I've been racing to get it done for 10 o'clock. Oh, this is great. Would anybody like to add on then to Tom's question?
I would say you shouldn't be switching series every single time you go up, but many careers at UCSF are very, very long, and sometimes you are doing different things every 10 years or just at different points in your career. And again, your series should reflect what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And if that involves a change in series, then it should involve a change in series.
I think also that you have to be prepared that you may have to go through an open search. And so you have to make that decision about whether you want to do that or not as you change series. So we have that currently going on in the School of Nursing.
Okay, great. Another question that came in from a participant is around professional development and professional development leave. Let's see. Perhaps Sunita, do you mind if I address this one to you? So this
not at all.
The question is, can you give examples of professional development leave? Are they more commonly granted in some departments than others? So these are things like sabbatical for the ladder rank series and then kind of non-sabbatical, non-state funded leave for folks in other series. Right.
Well, thank you for that question. And this one is, I think, a great one for others of my colleagues here to add on to. I think Dr. Kearney gave a great example of a mid-career decision where you decide you really need to acquire a set of skills that require some intensive training. And that's a great example of it. Leadership programs sometimes, or service that is to an important national organization that really requires more than a few hours of committee time. So it might be the president of an association or something like that. That's a worthwhile commitment for your professional role.
Great. Would anybody else like to add on? Okay.
Other than that needs to be negotiated, right, with your department chair, and that they have your other duties covered, and then you've got a source of funding to continue to cover your salary, particularly if you're in an academic Senate series.
This is Jeff. I think the term sabbatical gets thrown around, and I think it's used. And so could one of you maybe say what is a sabbatical and how are we using that precise term, and what is faculty leave and what does that represent, and what's the responsibilities to the individual and to the department for each? Because that also helps structure this.
Yeah, excellent question. Would anybody like to take that?
I mean, I can take it. The word sabbatical is used when you're in the ladder rank series, that you're entitled to take a sabbatical. Since we have so many faculty who are not in the ladder rank series, the terminology for it is professional development leave. It really is a perk of working at UCSF or in most academic settings to be able to take off for 6 months or a year even, or even 3 months, and to do something different to gain some skills. But it does have to be negotiated with the department. I mean, you can't just say, I'm going to leave. It's sort of like, well, who's going to cover your responsibilities and who's going to cover your research? I mean, you have to have a plan. It has to go through a whole process of approval, but many faculty do take it to learn new skills. But I would say it's sort of equivalent at UCSF, professional development leave and sabbatical.
There are some, by the way, in advance, there's like, I think a module in there that tells you how many credits you've earned based on how long you've been around in terms of in your particular, in the ladder rank series. And the other thing is, I believe that is covered by state funding. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then the other thing is it has to be at another academic institution. So we had an issue where we had some faculty members, for instance, wanted to go to Google Brain. And could they in fact claim that as a sabbatical? But that's a private company. So that did not qualify as a sabbatical leave. So I think you have to be careful. There are some constraints. You have to go through a process, like Renee was saying, of approval. And in the end, you have to provide evidence of what you did, I guess, during that sabbatical. And clearly the premise of it is, right, is to enhance your career track, bringing new skills and something that can enhance your mission to the university.
Great. So another question that was submitted was around the use of titles. Am I obligated to use the term adjunct or clinical professor when introducing myself at a conference or in my email signature? The terms mean different things at different institutions, and introducing myself as an adjunct professor might mean something else completely different than it does at UCSF to my colleague at another institution. Is there anyone, just raise your hand if you'd like to respond to that particular question. And one of you, please raise your hand. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bennett.
When there is a policy at UCSF that you should refer to yourself, no matter what series you're in, as an assistant professor, an associate professor, a professor, for the reasons, exactly the reasons in the question. If you say you're an adjunct professor, it means something outside of UCSF that it does not mean in UCSF. I mean, adjuncts are often lecturers, they're temporary people who work, let's say, in state universities or things like that, where adjunct is one of the series here. So for outside communications, yes, you just refer to yourself as an assistant professor, an associate, or a professor.
Yeah, that's correct. I also want to add that that's important what Dr. Binder said, because of, I know that some faculty have had issues with this around NIH and the reviewers understanding what those terms mean when they submit a grant.
Here's another question. Adjunct versus the in-resident series. Can someone please elaborate on the difference between those two series? Is there anyone who would like?
I can.
Okay.
I'll give it a shot and anybody can jump in. So as Dr. Aldridge showed on that one table, adjunct series, you can be in what we call imbalanced. So you have to have activity in all the 4 areas of criteria, but have emphasis in one. And most typically that's research. These are researchers, but they still have to teach professional competence and do some level of service. In residence faculty is an academic senate series that requires your 100% effort. And basically you're primarily, though, even though you have equal to ladder rank, you really have to be a independent researcher to advance with successful grantsmanship. And I think probably where some of the tension comes in within residence faculty is that, they're generating a lot of their own money for their salary and giving something to the department. But however, they still have those expectations. They're going to be on committees. They're going to be out there, professional societies. They're going to be, getting external recognition, as well as they're going to teach. And so, sometimes that's where the tension comes in, but basically that's the key difference, and they really have to do self-funding.
Great, thank you. Another question that came in regarding Senate versus non-Senate series. Can someone please elaborate on the difference between Senate versus non-Senate? What are the long-term benefits of being in a Senate series, like clinical X or in residence. Isn't it better just to gain promotion in the health sciences clinical series by exceeding the expectations in that series versus switching to a series where I might have a harder time advancing? That's a common question, a common kind of discussion topic between mentors and chairs and their faculty. Is there anybody who'd like to begin by addressing that one?
I mean, I'd be happy to, or someone else could do it. I think it's a very good question. At UCSF, if you want to refer to one of Brian's earlier slides, the privileges and responsibilities are very, very similar in the academic series and the non-academic series, because we have, as Brian said, 56% of our faculty are in HS clinical or adjunct. I would argue that it's best to be in the series that suits you and continue to move up the series and get promoted, rather than to be in another series and not get promoted. And there's very little difference between it. I mean, Brian mentioned the mortgage, if you're buying a house, that you're eligible for certain kinds of loans, but of course mortgage rates are so low right now, and the UC loan is an adjustable loan anyhow, so it'll go up. So a lot of faculty, even if they are in the academic senate, they will get a fixed low rate loan rather than an adjustable loan that right now is a little bit lower but can go up over 30 years to very high rates. So there's very little difference.
I'll just say, to add on to what Renee said, is that we've really tried to embrace the philosophy that there are no second-class citizens. And so we're trying to the extent possible, allowing for policy issues, that we treat everybody in a very similar fashion, and that we all contribute to the mission of this institution. And so we've tried to sort of break with what's going on in other campuses in terms of, for instance, allowing our health non-Senate faculty to get involved in the academic senate and committees and be part of the self-governance of our institution. So I think that's sort of an important philosophy. But again, then it becomes a very fine point about, as an individual faculty member, do I want to subject myself to more strenuous requirements to get promoted and merited in one series versus the other? And I think it really comes down to what you feel is the best fit for you personally and what incentivizes you and what, for your passions in terms of your academic career.
This is Jeff, just to follow up, because when you said that we're all treating everyone as equal citizens, all of our heads nodded. At the same time, Tom, you alluded to something that I think is still going on. Like, my department chair encouraged me to get in ClinX, or my chief encouraged me to get into ClinX. And so we say, everyone on this call is trying to create a sense of equity. And yet there still are these undercurrents out there that chiefs and chairs want to say, how many of my faculty are in the academic senate tract? And so I just want to say that's real, that's out there. But what I'm hoping you all, if you're experiencing that, what we in the leadership of the hospitals and the organization feel like we're trying our best to support all of us. There's also operational issues. I have junior faculty, like, I'm not stupid, Jeff. Why would if I can get promoted and I can call myself an associate professor at UCSF, why would I do all that other extra stuff? And then I have people who say, Jeff, I'm a clinician educator and I'm building curriculum. I want to be seen in ClinX. I am going to go up for ClinX because that's what I do, and that's really important to me. So there's a spectrum there. And so if you're feeling like it's a little nebulous, maybe it is, but we're trying to create room for you to do what you do and be what you want to be and be acknowledged for it.
And then one last question. This may not be quick, but we'll have to make the response quick. Are you required to stop the clock for childbearing and maternity leave? And in general, doesn't this result in delays in female faculty being promoted? Good question.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to stop the clock, and many faculty don't stop the clock. It's an option. I mean, you often feel pressure, am I going to be able to get everything done? And you can apply for a stop the clock, but you don't have to use the stop the clock. It's just, the intent of it is to be supportive. to faculty who are involved in childbearing, child rearing, and now with COVID also. But you're absolutely not, it's not necessary that you do it. It's only if you want to do it.
Just one other comment, Brian, just to add on to that. What happens more commonly is that somebody may want to defer an upcoming action like a merit or promotion, and because of whatever reason, maybe childcare or whatever. So, however, just to keep in mind that, I guess, and you clarified this, is that it could show up as a deceleration on advance if it's a merit, but not a promotion. So again, there is some flexibility in the system that you personally can say, no, I want to hold off on moving forward. But again, there could be some implications in terms of a merit.
Okay, great. Thank you all to your panelists. Thank you to Hannah for giving us an extra 15 minutes I didn't know we had. I really appreciate this engagement on all sides. For you as panelists, and for those of you who submitted your questions, I apologize if we didn't get to your question, but feel free to reach out to us individually if you'd like to. And with that, I'll ask our panelists to mute and stop video, and then I think we can then move on to the next presentation. Thank you again.